Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross, and it is time for a preview of the first major of the year, the Australian Open, the Happy Slam, the Australian Summer's grand conclusion. It is a joyous time for tennis fans all around the world, and I don't know. I think everyone is feeling particularly giddy, especially after a lot of really great tennis the first couple weeks of the season. Of course, still some events ongoing, but we turn our attention to the Australian Open. If you are new to the channel, and it has been a while since I've done a preview, I suppose, we're going to do Dark Horses, which is an unseeded player who I think is most likely to go deep. An upset alert, that has to be a seeded player who I think may lose early, is in danger of losing early at the very least. Early popcorn, first or second round match. Usually at majors, it's a first round match that I think is going to be a banger. I think it's going to be great. I think you should watch it. And quarterfinal predictions, final weekend predictions. I don't know how much I have to say before we get into these quarters. Headlines, Alcaraz and Djokovic in the same quarter. Last year, that was my predicted final. 1 year has made a world of difference in the world of Novak Djokovic. Obviously, coming into last year's Australian Open, he was coming off of a year where he dominated the field on hard court, won the vast majority of the big hard court events. And now we're in a very different place. His seeding is very different, and he's in a quarter with Carlos Alcaraz, a guy who won 2 majors last year. There's also an argument to be made that the contenders are unbalanced, that the bottom half is way stronger than the top half. I sort of see where that's coming from. If you look at, for example, let's go to the objective kind of side of things. If you look at the tennis abstract forecast, there are 4 players who have a more than 5% chance of winning the title, which is Sinner and Alcaraz and Zverev and Djokovic. And 3 out of those 4 are on the bottom. Again, it gets kind of funky when you have Djokovic outside of the top 4 seeds, whereas the ELO ratings has him as a top contender. So that's kind of the disparity there. But if you look at the U.S. Open finalist in Taylor Fritz being on the top half with Jannik. If you look at Daniil Medvedev, last year's Australian Open finalist, being on the top half with Jannik, I don't think it's an unbalanced draw. Would I rather be Jannik Sinner than a lot of these top guns on the bottom? Yes, I would. But I think it's splitting hairs for the most part. The other thing that I think is super apparent, amazing first round matches. There were some very difficult early popcorn decisions, and I like that. I want to have to think hard about the early popcorn. So let's not delay any further and get into Jannik Sinner's quarter. He's got De Minaur, Tsitsipas, Rune, Hurkacz, Khachanov, Cerundolo, and Caboli. My dark horse here is Cam Norrie. My upset alert is Stefanos Tsitsipas. And my early popcorn is Hurkacz versus Griekspoor. Let's start with Norrie. This is not really a recent results thing because if you look at what he's done at the start of 2025, kind of shrug your shoulders. It's meh. In fact, had a pretty bad loss in the first round of Adelaide, but I'm throwing that out. Week before a major, plays a lucky loser. Facundo Diaz-Acosta loses badly, whatever, throwing it out. I'm looking at the bigger picture, what I know about Cam Norrie in his first round matchup against Matteo Berrettini, right by kind of Holger Rune as well in the draw. So it's a very competitive little section there. And I think Norrie plays his best as an underdog in best of 5. And I've seen a lot of his best tennis in the beginning of the year. I think he's a strong starter usually. And I mean, if you look at last year, right, his flashes were at the Australian Open where he made the 4th round and, beat Ruud and nearly beat Zverev, and Wimbledon, where he played probably the best match of his season against Jack Draper, then ran into an unfortunate injury. So I like him as an underdog in best of 5. You look at the matchup against Berrettini. Norrie is a top returns in play guy. He makes a lot of returns. It's key against Matteo's serve, obviously. And Cam is very tactical, and he moves the ball around the court super well. And that's really important to do against Berrettini. You can't let him operate from the middle. You need to be able to maneuver the ball around the court, and that's what Cam really does well. Berrettini's last 3 hard court slams. First round, second round, second round. Plus, his record against top 50 lefties is slightly worse than his record career against top 50 righties. And he's only played Nadal twice, so I don't think the Rafa factor like skews that stat where I'm being disingenuous. Only a slight difference, but it's something that I looked at here. So I think Cam Norrie might make some noise here. My upset alert is Tsitsipas. This is an interesting spot for Tsitsipas, who's played really well over the course of his career at the Australian Open. He does like this event. He has dealt with injuries, in a couple of the last, the more recent sample size of Australian Open runs. There have been injury issues. Like last year, it was his back. But, okay, here's what's weird. He plays Alex Mickelson in the first round, and I have that match at 50-50. And that's why Tsitsipas is on upset alert, because I think Mickelson can beat him, and I'll get to that in a second. But he has great matchups if he advances, because he's got some, I think, sort of a soft second round, a third round against Karen Khachanov, who he just loves playing. He just dominates Khachanov, who really struggles with Tsitsipas' serve +1, just doesn't really break him ever. And then de Minaur. Tsitsipas loves playing de Minaur. He just likes that lower, flatter, softer ball. He eats it up. And like even on the backhand. So against Khachanov and de Minaur, Tsitsipas is a combined 19-2. Might make the quarterfinals if he beats Alex Mickelson. But he's on upset alert because I think Mickelson could beat him. Mickelson kills runaround cheating. So if you're a righty who likes to sort of cheat towards the runaround, Mickelson takes his backhand line at will, consistent, precise, early, often. Like he will run you into your forehand corner with that two-handed backhand. And he also has some serve firepower to bother Tsitsipas's returning, rack up some free points, which in these quick conditions that can happen against Steph when he goes up against a big server. We've seen it even at this tournament. He took a third round loss to Milos Raonic, I remember several years back. So Tsitsipas upset alert. Popcorn, Hurkacz versus Greek Sport. I've got this as a 5-setter. These guys tend to grapple with nerves at slams, both of them. And you're talking about a first round match at the Australian Open. That is when nerves are at their worst. That said, they are both attacking talents. They are both excellent servers. Obviously, Hurkacz a level above Griekspoor, but I see fireworks here. I think these are going to be tight sets with some really spectacular shot making late in tie breaks, and I think it's going to go 5. All right, quarterfinal prediction here is Jannik Sinner defeats Alex de Minaur. I would say this of all the quarters was probably the easiest prediction for me. I just wasn't considering too heavily a ton of other outcomes. Khachanov versus de Minaur, let me just address that. And I came into this event even before seeing the draw high on Khachanov. We know how good he is at hard court majors, and I think he just started to look like himself again at the end of last year. So I wanted to get behind him. But he loves to grind players down. And you just can't do that against de Minaur. You're not going to grind him down. It's not going to work. So I like Alex there. And as for the quarterfinal itself, Sinner over de Minaur, this has been an ugly bloodbath of a head-to-head. Sinner has beaten de Minaur in straight sets in their last 7 meetings. And I think the overall, I didn't actually write it down, I think it's like 11-1 Jannik. So look, I don't know where de Minaur finds an advantage anywhere. I don't think it's 11-1 actually, because I don't think de Minaur has a win. So let me just check this. Oh, it's 9-0. It's 9-0. So yeah, 9-0 Sinner. And that, I believe, is the quarterfinal. Now, that would be somewhat of an accomplishment for de Minaur because he's never made the Australian Open quarterfinal. So it would be his career best run at his home slam. And I think he'll be very determined to reach that milestone and go a step further than he ever has. I have him playing Bublik early in the third round because I have Bublik beating Francisco Cerundolo in the first round. Won't go through everybody's draw, but I will go through Sinner's path. I think Sinner, so Nicolas Jarry in the first round. I just don't think you can blast your way through Sinner. I don't think it's a great way to play him, and that's what Jarry will try to do. Jannik is just, he's so good at absorbing that kind of play style. So I actually think on paper that's going to be like, ooh, spooky first round for Sinner. I actually don't think that gets too tight for him. Taro Daniel, second round. Tomas Martin, Echeverry, third round. Technically, the seed would be Kaboli, but I like what I saw from Echeverry at United Cup. Then I have Sinner Hurkacz. Look, that's uncomfortable, right? Hurkacz was doing some things towards the end of United Cup. He was showing me some things. I said this on Monday Match Analysis. I thought he played great against Taylor Fritz. But he's going up against best returner in the world, won't be able to lean on his serve as much. Someone who's going to sort of, I mean, look, I still don't think Hurkacz hangs from the baseline with the best in the world. And he's not going to serve Sinner off the court in best of 5. Could maybe in best of 3, particularly on grass. Maybe he almost did that in Halle last year. But yeah, not in this case. And nerve management with Hurkacz's forehand, I think, is still a concern. All right, let's move on. The 4 seed is Taylor Fritz. He's got Medvedev, Rublev, Musetti, Tiafoe, Shelton, Popyrin, and Pechi Perricard. My dark horse here is Brandon Nakashima. My upset alert is Andrei Rublev. My early popcorn is not enough popcorn. Couldn't find enough. I ran out. Let's start with Nakashima, dark horse. I think he upsets Ben Shelton in the first round, ultimately. Shelton does lead that head-to-head 2-0, but 3 out of the 4 sets they've played have been tiebreaks. Nakashima, and look, that's not surprising. Nakashima is a high hold rate, low break rate guy. Shelton, high hold rate, low break rate guy. So you expect to see tiebreaks in this matchup, but I think Nakashima has sort of leveled up since they last played in their last 2 meetings. We know Brandon's going to hit spots. That can be tough on Shelton's return. Nakashima hangs in that ad side cross court really well. So I think Shelton's forehand into Nakashima's backhand is not going to be too joyous for Ben. And Brandon's just become really confident in big moments recently. Or I'd say starting, second half of 2024. He is 8-9 in the last 52 weeks against top 20 players. So when he goes up against a top 20 player in the last year, it's basically a 50-50 match. Now, Shelton's world number 21. But, I still look at that stat as sort of a tell. So I have Nakashima in that. And Pablo Carreño Busta in the second round. I think he can get through that. Musetti in the third round, that's sort of a shoulder shrug for me. But Nakashima beat Musetti at the U.S. Open in 4 sets. So I think there's a real chance for a 4th round run for Nakashima. My upset alert is Andrei Rublev. All right, he plays Joao Fonseca in the first round. This is huge. Ultimately, I think in general, there's a lot of pressure on Fonseca right now. And that makes me want to just wait and see. Like, okay, how do you handle it now? You've got a much bigger spotlight. You've got just a different vibe around not just your career, but your life. He is right now in the midst of sort of that coming into stardom phase. And that can be hard. And it makes me want to say, like, all right, let's just first see how he handles it here. But for this particular match, he gets to play underdog. And it's Andrei Rublev who comes in with, I think, a lot of pressure on him to hold down the fort against somebody who's just coming onto the scene. Fonseca, he's got tons of matches under his belt already. He plays the next gen finals. He doesn't lose. He plays the Canberra. Sorry, I think it's Canberra, but I never am 100% clear on the pronunciation there. He plays that challenger, Nick Kyrgios' hometown, wins it. I don't think he lost a set. Australian Open qualifying, didn't even come close to losing a set. So this man's on a crazy win streak. He has tons of matches under his belt where Andre played one match in Hong Kong. He lost to Fabian Marozsan. That's it. So I think Fonseca right now, feeling it, hot. He can play with freedom. He's an underdog. He's playing a top player. He's never played a top player. This is a first for Fonseca. Rublev hasn't really felt matches, hasn't felt wins in a while, coming off of a year that was pretty uneven. First round of a slam. This is an uncomfortable spot for Rublev. And stylistically, I think where Fonseca is going to run into problems is against these elite pace absorbers, where he might find, damn, like my pace just isn't working like it does against everybody else. It's not damaging. It's not having the effect. It's not drawing the short ball. It's not drawing the errors. Rublev is not one of those guys. Pace works against Rublev. Like, I think blasting the ball and rushing Rublev is a pretty good way to play him. This is obviously going to be a clash of power baseliners, and shot for shot, I think Fonseca can hang right in there. I think I might already like Fonseca's backhand better than Rublev's. So I think Fonseca actually wins this match. And I don't know how far he takes it. I don't know where the physicality is at. Best of 5. That might become an issue at some point because that's unproven. He's still young. He's still developing. I don't think he's ready to do a real run here. But I think he beats Rublev. Popcorn. Not enough popcorn. Let me just list off the matches. Fritz versus Brooksby. The return of Jenson Brooksby. I don't necessarily know if that match could be a blowout. I don't know how Jenson is right now, but it's intriguing, the return of Jenson Brooksby. Pechi Pericart versus Monfils. I like that. Shelton versus Nakashima. Yeah, sure. I mean, that to me is 2 top 30 hardcourt players going at it in the first round. Easy. Musetti versus Arnaldi. That's a great one. You talk about artistry and movement, sharing the court together. That's awesome. Of course, Rublev versus Fonseca. And just for good measure, let me throw in a second round match here. Lerner Tien, Daniil Medvedev. We could get that. We could. All right. Quarterfinal. Shall we? I've got Taylor Fritz defeating Daniil Medvedev. I don't know what to expect from Medvedev here. And I've talked a lot about his game. I think many of you have probably already heard where I stand on Daniil's tennis right now. I'm not going to rehash that stuff. Check out the top 10 preview if you want kind of an idea of where I stand on all these guys. But in terms of this tournament itself, Daniil and his wife just welcomed their second child into the world. He did not play any warm-ups. He arrived late in Australia, and he seemed extremely burnt out in Turin. And this all has me questioning if the off-season intensity and the preparation for this Australian Open was fully there. And it needs to be for Daniil. He has to be 100% fit because this is a very physical endeavor. Think about what it took last year for Medvedev to make the Australian Open final. I mean, it was 5-setter after 5-setter after 5-setter. I don't know how his legs didn't fall off until ultimately they did in the final, right? Now, he has a great draw, and he's a great best-of-5 match. He's a great best-of-5 match player. So I always like him to figure it out. I do think his best tennis in the last couple of years has been mainly at the slams. So, sure, I'll put him in the quarterfinal. But when I have Fritz beating him in the quarterfinal, I don't really envision Taylor Fritz beating a supreme Daniil Medvedev, a top-tier Daniil Medvedev. Not in my head. In my head, Daniil coming into this event, might be at 80, 85%, maybe 90%. And, obviously we're talking about small margins here. As for Taylor Fritz, I wouldn't usually want to pick a guy who just made his first semifinal to just do it again the very next major. But as you know, I'm a big believer in Taylor's level all throughout last year, particularly in the second half. I thought he looked really fit at United Cup, the movement, the willingness to engage in the lengthy rallies. I just think that the fitness was great. And that U.S. Open run has to help the mental because he is one of those players who had that quarterfinal barrier that probably did occupy a lot of real estate in his head. And he said after the U.S. Open, it was an eye-opening experience for him because he didn't even think he played that well. And that is really what bolsters belief and confidence, is if you can feel like you can make a major final without everything going right in your game, without actually feeling great about your tennis at the time, that's where you want to be. That's where you start really believing that you belong making deep runs at the biggest events. Before we get to the next quarter, this episode is brought to you by all of the new ways to consume Monday Match Analysis in 2025. We are now on Facebook. We just launched a new YouTube channel for shorts. And for the first time in 2025, I'll have exclusive short form content on that channel, as well as on Instagram and TikTok only. The links to all of this stuff is in the description. If any of those things interest you, please give me a follow. Again, links are in the description. And also, while we're at it, I will have round-by-round Australian Open coverage, a mailbag to start the event. So subscribe and like this video. Thank you. We move on now to Carlos Alcaraz's quarter. He's got Djokovic, Dimitrov, Draper, Korda, Lehechka, Mahach, and Thompson. My dark horse here is Riley Opelka. My upset alert is Sebastian Korda. And my early popcorn is Djokovic versus Basaveretti in the first round. Dark horse Opelka, let's start there. I've talked about him enough. Last week's Monday Match Analysis went deep on Opelka and where he's at in his career, but more specifically, how highly I regarded him pre-injury. So now he's shown flashes of not just that Opelka, but an even better Opelka. I mean, plain and simple, if he plays the same as he did in Brisbane, he's a top 10 player. I'm not expecting that. It's a new tournament. It's a new week. And I actually like Mahach better. So I pick Mahach to beat Opelka when they ultimately play. It would be, I think, a second round match. But among the unseeded players, there's just no doubt about who's the most dangerous, who's the most likely to make a run after what we saw in Brisbane. It's Riley Opelka. Upset alert is Sebastian Korda, who is playing his first event since last year's U.S. Open this week in Adelaide. Just got a walkover from Thanasi Kokkinakis, so he's going to play the Adelaide final, which is, I think, big for Korda's confidence. Like, ultimately, whatever he does in Adelaide now will be well worth it. But for me, it's just too much too quickly. I don't think you can, you don't play a real match. You don't play real matches for a 3 to 4 month stretch, probably in between 3 and 4. And now you play an entire, like a full week, and then you go to a slam. I think that's too much for Korda. Lucas Klein is his first round match. That's tough too. Klein is now qualified here at the Australian Open back-to-back years. He nearly beat Zverev in the main draw last year. He crushes the ball. He hits the fuzz off the ball and clearly loves these conditions. So I think he can unsettle Korda, make him defend a lot. And Korda's been pretty upset prone. Even at majors last few years, he doesn't have any second weeks since making the quarterfinal at the Australian Open in 2022. So his last 7 majors, that was 23. So his last 7 majors have ended in the first week. My popcorn, Djokovic against Basaveretti. Djokovic against his stylistic clone, somebody who really directly copied Novak in a lot of the things he does, including like his serve technique. So that's a cool story, not one that we're not used to at this point. And it's what happens when the legends of the sport just kind of stick around for as long as Novak has. But obviously for Djokovic, first match with Murray in the box. And of all the first round matches, this is the one I'm most looking forward to. Also, by the way, Basaveretti, he's playing great ball. He just made a run to the semis in Auckland, shredded the Challenger Tour at the end of last year. So he's on the way up. Quarterfinal prediction. Here we go. Let's do it. Here it is. Alcaraz defeats Mahach. I'm back in Mahach. I'm going bold here. I know the first two quarters, quite chalky. No real big surprises. Maybe some people will fancy Medvedev over Fritz, just given the overall track records there. But other than that, it's been pretty safe. I'm going to kind of throw a little bit of a dart with Mahach here because everything I've seen from him since the U.S. Open last year and the beginning of this year suggests that he's right up there with a lot of the best. Maybe not consistently, especially physically, and that's really where the question comes in. But after the big fall, the straight set win over Alcaraz in Shanghai when Alcaraz, it was just, sometimes Mahach plays a level that is just ridiculously good. And by the way, Tiafoe at the Australian Open last year. So at this event last year, I think Mahach kind of went Super Saiyan mode where he hit that kind of 10 out of 10 level. In my eyes, the first time I had ever seen it. So I made a video last year during the Australian Open where I was just gushing about the level he achieved. But ultimately, United Cup, he shared the court with Ruud, Hurkacz, and Fritz. And then he beat the brakes off of Flavio Caboli. So that was his United Cup. He looked like he was on their level. Ruud, Hurkacz, Fritz, all of those matches. Not one was he severely outplayed. He had cramping in the Fritz match and he had to retire, which I'm going to give him a pass on. And here's why. He had a tough offseason. He was sick. And I know he was doing extra fitness off court, getting ready for the Australian Open. So I imagine what happened is he was pushing himself so hard. He was kind of burning both ends of the candle because he was doing fitness off the court. Then he was playing tough matches and it was just too much for him. But it should make him stronger ultimately, which is why he was doing the fitness off the court to get ready for the Australian Open. That said, you could easily counter me. You could be like, Gill, he's retired a million times in the last 4 months, and that would be accurate. He has retired way too much in the last 4 months, which is kind of a concern. But he loves the big stage. He has the explosiveness to play with anybody, and I'm going to send him through the Novak section. This isn't a matchup thing with Novak. It's someone who I knew I wanted to get behind before the draw came out. I don't think Djokovic is going to have a consistent season. I do think Djokovic is going to have great highlights this year at big events. I think he's going to make some deep runs and maybe win a big title, maybe win a major. I'm not discounting that possibility, but I think he's going to have an inconsistent season. And with so much inactivity since the Olympics, there really hasn't been much. And I do like that he played in Brisbane, but obviously he takes the loss to Opelka. I just think it's going to take him a little bit longer than usual to get the engine going. And obviously that has not been a thing throughout his career. He's played his best tennis at the Australian Open and he's won it 10 times. I don't think you can just take that Djokovic and apply it to this Djokovic. I think it's a different thing. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of Novak we get. Oh, I guess maybe I should. Do I have anything to say about Alcaraz? Do I? Let's see. Let me talk about his path. Let me pull out my draw. Here's who I have him beating. I have him beating Shevchenko, Nishioka, Jordan Thompson, a Jack Draper who I don't know how much to expect at a Jack. He's had this hip issue. He's got a good draw though. He's got to watch out for Kokkinakis. if Tanasi is healthy. He obviously withdrew from Adelaide, so I don't know what's going on there. Draper's got such a good draw that I put him in the fourth round, even though I was kind of ready to pick an upset against him if somebody came along who enticed me. But yeah, Draper's been dealing with a hip, so I don't know what kind of jack it's going to be. And yeah, that puts him in the quarterfinals where he'd take on Machac. That would be a rematch. I don't think, Tomas is quite ready. First of all, the longevity factor, because I'm worried about Mahac's physicality. And I don't know if he's quite ready for the major semifinal. I'm not going to go that far with Tomas Machac. Finally, we arrive at the Alexander Zverev Quarter. He is the number 2 seed. We've got Ruud, Paul, Humbert, Fils, Tabilo, Baez, FAA. My dark horse here is Jerry Shang. My upset alert is Casper Ruud. My early popcorn is Fernley versus Kyrgios, round 1. Dark horse Shang, I'm not really sure about this because, it's another guy who has some physical questions. I mean, he did not look healthy in Jeddah. It looked like at the next gen finals that he was playing through an injury. He was there, he played, but it looked like he was playing through an injury. Then he made the semis in Hong Kong and he pulled out. He retired in his semifinal match because he was sick. He had a fever. So, okay, at least it wasn't like an injury, but I like the way he is progressing physically. I think, so in terms of his explosiveness, I think he is now fast enough and strong enough to start to make some big moves. And he's kind of Machac-like in that respect, where the health is a question, but the top level is high end because he is twitchy. He hits the ball big. He's a shot maker off of both wings, and he covers the court like a mosquito. And now he actually even serves, and this was the big thing that he worked on last year. His second serve is not as attackable, and his first serve is not as lightweight as it used to be. So I'm just kind of looking for Shang to potentially make a run here on hard court. He's also good. He's good with the heat. Training in Florida for most of his life. My upset alert is Casper Ruud. And people are going to be like, oh, here we go again. Gill doubting Ruud. I didn't want to do it. I think he looked great at United Cup. The cardio wasn't quite there. Like, I think the shot tolerance, his physicality cardiovascularly was kind of holding back his shot tolerance just a little bit, but that's nothing that can't be smoothed over with some extra kind of time to build up before the Australian Open. So, I think Casper looked really good, and it had me thinking, okay, if he plays like that all year, he will be top 10. I will be wrong about my preseason prediction. But look, he got hammered with the worst draw out of any top 8 seed by far. By far. This is a total gauntlet that Ruud has to contend with here. So it's Jaume Munar first round, who is incredibly physical and is probably playing the best tennis that he has played in his career right now. And that's going to be an interesting one because Ruud is going to have to finish points on his terms. Like, that match could get very physical is all I'm saying. But, I don't think Ruud will lose to Munar. Second round, Nicholas Basilashvili, a former top 20 player, has qualified. We know how he plays. He blitzes the ball at every opportunity. For many years, like when he was in his prime, he was the biggest hitter on tour. He hit bigger than anybody else. Serve, not very good. Consistency, super hot and cold. And that's why, you saw his career play out how it did. But, okay, is he back? He just won 3 matches. He likes the conditions. That's dangerous if he beats Mensik in the first round. And if he doesn't, well, now it's Ruud against Jakob Mensik, one of the brightest and best young stars in the game. Third round, could be FAA, could be Jerry Shang. Felix is playing really well. FAA's first serve looks great. He's been kind of dictating with the serve and the forehand and moving a little bit better than he did last year as well. So, I mean, FAA beat Taylor Fritz at the United Cup. Great win. Served like 80% in that match, which certainly helped him a lot. It's the hardest section in the entire draw. And by the way, Struff potentially is the third round as well. I want to put some respect on Jan-Lennard Struff's name there. So Munar, Basilashvili or Mensik, Shang, FAA or Struff. It's just a lot of offense and talent to contend with. This is a quick, hard court. I think Ruud might be in trouble here in the first three rounds in one of these matches. If he gets through, I'll be impressed. Popcorn, Kyrgios versus Fernley. Here's what I'm going to say. I was recently speaking to a source with knowledge of streaming numbers. And this person told me that Kyrgios is enormous numerically. His match against Pechi Pericard was the most streamed men's match in week one of the ATP season. The most. Djokovic played 3 matches. Kyrgios Pechi Pericard was the most streamed match of week one on the ATP Tour. So it is not fake. It is not like Nick didn't make up the fact that a lot of people watch him play tennis. The media didn't make up the fact that a lot of people are interested in his tennis. It is a real thing. And frankly, I will be one of the people. It's very hard for me to watch night sessions at the Australian Open. So if it's a night session, I might miss it at least live. But I will be one of the people who will be tuning in to Kyrgios versus Fernley. Jacob Fernley, intriguing story in his own right, just kind of trying to figure out how good he can be as a touring pro. But then, you have Nick in Australia, and it's just going to be interesting to see how that thing plays out. I actually think Fernley's going to win, for the record. I think Fernley wins. I just don't trust Nick's body at all here. Quarterfinal prediction is going to be Zverev defeats Tommy Paul. So obviously Tommy, just in Casper's half of the quarter, so it's in Casper's 8th, but he's got the far easier 16th where he would have to play Kei Nishikori potentially in the second round. So that would be a big one. That would be a tough one. But I still do trust Tommy Paul in this spot. And Tommy, 11-5 record at the Australian Open. Obviously, that breakthrough semifinal. But the biggest thing is that he doesn't need to deal with that cluster of a section that Casper Ruud has to deal with. Zverev pulled out of United Cup with a bicep strain. So that kind of is a concern, but it might be kind of soreness, might be kind of precautionary. Who knows? He is a 2-time Australian Open semifinalist. He has been very consistent at the majors. There were lots of positive trends in his game last year, especially on the forehand, being aggressive off of that win. I think he can dominate the serve return battle in this prospective quarterfinal against Tommy Paul. And if Zverev is right, he should get through this. I have him beating Puig, Darderi, Fernley, Humbert, and Tommy Paul. Pretty manageable for Alexander Zverev. Which brings us to the final weekend prediction. Here we go. For all the marbles. In the final weekend, I have Sinner over Fritz in 4 sets. I have Alcaraz over Zverev in 5 sets. And I have Sinner over Alcaraz in 4 sets. It would be the first ever major final between Sinner and Alcaraz. Wouldn't that be a joy? Why did I pick it? Well, in 2024, I feel there was quite a great distance between Sinner and Alcaraz and the rest of the field. I think that gap was sizable, and there are a lot of questions that can be raised about everyone within Tier 2, everyone who is really kind of looking to challenge Sinner and Alcaraz and equal them and surpass them. think there are a lot of questions about those guys, whether it be a Djokovic or a Medvedev or a Zverev or a Fritz. And meanwhile, I see no reasons to doubt Sinner and Alcaraz right now. I have no concerns. So I send them to the final. Why Sinner over Alcaraz? Well, let me first start with the things that give me pause. The defense starts now for Sinner. So this is the first time where it's living up to the expectations of the ridiculous year that he just had. And it will be nearly impossible to live up to those expectations. So, mentally there's a different dynamic. That starts now. Alcaraz, head-to-head momentum. Winner of the last three, I don't think Six King Slam. I think Sinner will look to channel that, but I don't think it will be part of Alcaraz's psyche. And I just don't think it carries enough weight to really reverse the fact that Alcaraz has a lot of head-to-head momentum here. Now, flipping the coin to why I actually picked Jannik Sinner. First of all, these are the most Sinner-favorable conditions you could create. This is a quick, hard court. At the major that Alcaraz has not won, there's probably a little bit of undue pressure for Carlos now at the Australian Open, more than the other three, because he's trying to become the youngest player to complete the Grand Slam. But just in terms of obviously court speed and the fact that it's a hard court, you look at what Sinner has done and what Alcaraz has done in the last 2 years, it'll kind of tell you what you need to know about how a fast hard court is probably, it'd be even better if it were indoors. But other than that, it's probably the court that Jannik Sinner would most want to play Alcaraz on. I definitely trust Sinner to reach the final more than Alcaraz. That factors in here. It's a matter of consistency and draw. I also love how long Jannik's offseason was. I love it. I'm not docking points from Alcaraz for playing exhibition matches. I'm not docking points, but I'm adding bonus points for Sinner for having a nice, meaty, lengthy break where I trust that after the long and physical season that he properly recovered and rested, and that he properly had time to tinker with whatever he wanted to tinker with and look to make technical gains and try out different equipment and different tactics and patterns and all of that, and build up his fitness and still be fresh and have fully charged batteries for the start of the Australian Open. That time, by not playing any warm-ups, by not playing any exhibitions after the season, that is what Jannik has given himself. So I love that. And I just think physically, Sinner's going to be at a higher level than he was at Indian Wells and Roland Garros, where in both of those matches, Alcaraz kind of caught him slowing down late. And I don't think that would happen here. So I've got Sinner to continue his hard court dominance at this year's Australian Open. Still have Alcaraz finishing the year number 1, but I've got Sinner at the Australian Open. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.